A poor single mother accidentally called a millionaire, asking for money for baby milk. A call that should never have happened, but changed 2 lives forever. What happened after this accidental call between a desperate mother and one of Michigan's wealthiest men is going to shock you. Sarah Martinez sat on the cold kitchen floor of her cramped apartment in Detroit, Michigan, holding her crying 4-month-old son, Tyler, against her chest while staring at her empty wallet. The eviction notice on the counter seemed to mock her, as Tyler's desperate cries echoed through the thin walls. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from her landlord, and her bank account displayed a devastating 0 balance that made her stomach twist into knots. The last can of baby formula sat empty in the trash, and Tyler hadn't eaten in over 6 hours. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, knowing she had already borrowed money from every friend and family member who would still answer her calls. Her pride had died weeks ago when she lost her job at the local diner, but her desperation had just reached a breaking point that terrified her to her core. With shaky fingers, she typed a message to her estranged sister Lisa, whom she hadn't spoken to in months after their last fight about money. The message was simple but heartbreaking. "Lisa, please, Tyler needs formula. Can you lend me $30? I'll pay you back Friday when I get my unemployment check. I'm begging you." But in her exhaustion and panic, Sarah didn't notice she had selected the wrong contact from her phone's auto-suggest feature. The message went to a number she had never dialed before, belonging to someone whose life was about to intersect with hers in the most unexpected way. 3 blocks away, in a penthouse office overlooking the Detroit River, billionaire tech mogul David Richardson was working late on a merger deal when his personal phone buzzed with a message that would make him question everything he thought he knew about fate and second chances. David stared at the desperate plea on his screen, knowing immediately that this wasn't meant for him. But something about the raw desperation in those words, the mention of a baby named Tyler, and the sheer vulnerability of a mother begging for $30, hit him like a physical blow to the chest. For the first time in years, the man who owned half of Detroit's downtown district felt something crack open inside his carefully guarded heart. David Richardson had built his empire by making calculated decisions, but nothing could have prepared him for the wave of emotion that crashed over him as he read that text message again. The woman on the other end had no idea she was asking a billionaire for help, and something about that raw authenticity made him set down his platinum pen and push away the merger documents that suddenly seemed insignificant. He had been orphaned at age 7, bouncing between foster homes where $30 might as well have been $30 million, and he remembered the gnawing emptiness of hunger that no child should ever experience. Without overthinking it, David typed back, "I think you have the wrong number, but is your baby okay?" He hit send before his rational mind could stop him, knowing that his usual protocol was to ignore unknown messages entirely. His phone buzzed almost immediately with a response that made his chest tighten. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, wrong number, please ignore." But David couldn't ignore it, not when he could practically feel the desperation radiating through the screen like heat from a fire. Sarah stared at her phone in horror, realizing she had just shared her most vulnerable moment with a complete stranger. Her face burned with embarrassment as she quickly typed an apology. But then something unexpected happened. The stranger wrote back, "Don't apologize. How much do you need for formula?" She read the message 3 times, certain she was hallucinating from exhaustion, because strangers didn't offer to help other strangers, especially not at 2 in the morning in Detroit where everyone minded their own business. "I can't take money from someone I don't know," Sarah typed back, even as Tyler's cries grew more desperate and her heart hammered against her ribs. But the response came quickly. "What if I'm someone who remembers what it's like to be hungry? My name is David. Now we're not strangers." Something about the simplicity of that statement, the lack of judgment or pity, made Sarah's defenses crumble just slightly. Before she could change her mind, she found herself typing, $30 for formula. I can pay you back Friday. But what appeared on her screen next made her drop the phone like it was on fire. $5,000 sent via mobile transfer. Take care of Tyler. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the phone, staring at the notification that confirmed the impossible had just happened in her kitchen at 2:15 in the morning. David sat back in his leather chair, watching the city lights twinkle below as he wondered what he had just done. $5,000 was pocket change to him, but he knew it would change everything for the woman named Sarah and her son Tyler. What he didn't know was that this impulsive act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. But before you hear what happened next, tell me in the comments, what would you do if a stranger offered to help you in your darkest moment? Sarah stared at her phone screen until her eyes watered, convinced the notification was some kind of cruel joke or technical glitch. $5,000 didn't just appear in broke single mothers' accounts at 2 a.m, especially not from mysterious strangers named David, who seemed to understand hunger in a way that made her chest ache. She refreshed her banking app 7 times, watching the balance jump from 0 to an amount that represented 6 months of her previous salary at the diner, and each refresh made her hands shake harder than the last. Tyler had finally stopped crying after she managed to scrape together enough powdered formula from 3 different empty containers, mixed with more water than the instructions recommended, but it was enough to quiet his desperate hunger for now. As she watched her son's tiny fingers curl around her thumb while he drank, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the absence of immediate panic, replaced by a confusing mixture of gratitude and suspicion that made her stomach twist in knots. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers and typed, "This is too much, I only needed $30. What do you want from me?" The response came back almost immediately, as if David had been waiting by his phone. "I want you to buy formula, pay your rent, and stop worrying about money for 5 minutes. That's it." The simplicity of his answer made tears spring to her eyes because, in her experience, people always wanted something in return, especially men who helped desperate women in the middle of the night. "Why would you help someone you don't know?" she typed, still unable to fully process what was happening. David's response arrived quickly. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing, and I never forgot how it felt to have hope again. Consider this paying it forward." Something about those words resonated deep in Sarah's chest, touching a part of her that had been frozen by months of struggling alone with a baby and bills that never stopped coming. But as Sarah sat in her quiet kitchen, holding Tyler and processing the impossible turn her life had just taken, she had no idea that 3 blocks away, David Richardson was pacing his penthouse office, wondering why a stranger's desperation had affected him so profoundly. He hadn't told her that his company, Richardson Technologies, was headquartered right here in Detroit, or that he could probably see her apartment building from his office window if he knew which direction to look. What he also didn't know was that their connection would soon become much more complicated than a simple act of late-night charity. David couldn't sleep after sending that money, which was unusual for a man who typically compartmentalized his emotions as efficiently as he organized his business deals. He found himself staring out at the Detroit skyline, wondering about Sarah and Tyler, imagining the relief she must be feeling, and questioning why this random encounter had stirred something in him that years of therapy and business success had failed to address. The rational part of his mind insisted he should forget about them and move on, but something deeper kept pulling his thoughts back to that desperate text message. At 6 a.m, his phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. "I bought formula and groceries. Tyler is sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. I don't have words for what you've done for us. Thank you." David read the message while drinking his morning coffee, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that simple update filled him with more satisfaction than closing his latest $100 million acquisition had provided just last week. He made an impulsive decision that his board of directors would have questioned. Instead of heading to his usual morning meetings, David drove through the streets of Detroit until he found himself in Sarah's neighborhood. He didn't have her exact address, but something about seeing the area where she lived, understanding her world just a little better, felt important in a way he couldn't rationalize or explain to himself. The neighborhood was rough around the edges, with boarded-up storefronts and apartment buildings that had seen better decades, but David also noticed the small signs of community: an elderly man sweeping his front steps, a woman hanging colorful laundry on a fire escape, children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. It reminded him of his own childhood before the foster homes, when his mother would walk him to school through similar streets, holding his hand and promising that things would get better someday. As he drove back toward downtown, David couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Sarah was just beginning, not ending. What he didn't know was that Sarah had spent the morning researching random acts of kindness, trying to understand what kind of person sends $5,000 to a stranger, and her internet search had just led her to an article about Detroit's most generous philanthropist that featured a photo of someone who looked remarkably familiar. Before continuing with what Sarah discovered, like the video and subscribe to the channel. because this story is going to get even more incredible. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw the photograph in the Detroit Business Journal article titled, "Local Tech Mogul Quietly Donates Millions to City Charities." The man in the expensive suit standing next to the mayor looked exactly like someone she might imagine sending mysterious text messages at 2 in the morning, and the caption read, "David Richardson, CEO of Richardson Technologies, prefers to keep his charitable work private but has donated over $50 million to Detroit area causes in the past 5 years alone." Her hands trembled as she scrolled through more articles, learning that David Richardson was 34 years old, orphaned as a child, built his tech company from nothing, and was worth an estimated $2.8 billion. The same man who had casually sent her $5,000 owned 3 buildings in downtown Detroit and had been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine twice in the past year for his innovative approach to urban technology development. Sarah felt dizzy as the reality hit her. She hadn't just texted some generous stranger, she had accidentally contacted one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Michigan. The money he had sent her represented less than what he probably spent on lunch. But for her and Tyler, it meant the difference between eviction and stability, between hunger and security, between despair and hope. Part of her wanted to text him immediately and ask why he hadn't told her who he was, but another part felt embarrassed that she had unknowingly begged a billionaire for $30 when he could have bought her entire apartment building without checking his bank balance. She stared at Tyler, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib for the first time in weeks, his little belly full of proper formula, and wondered what David Richardson really wanted from this situation. But what Sarah didn't know was that at that exact moment David was sitting in his morning board meeting, completely distracted from discussions about quarterly projections, because he couldn't stop thinking about a woman named Sarah and her son Tyler. His assistant had already placed 17 calls trying to reach him for urgent decisions, but for the first time in his professional life, David found himself caring more about whether a stranger had been able to buy groceries than whether his latest acquisition would increase shareholder value by 8%. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years building walls around his personal life, avoiding emotional connections that might make him vulnerable, and now a wrong number text message had accomplished what no amount of therapy or self-reflection had managed to achieve. It had reminded him what it felt like to be human again, to care about someone else's well-being more than his own carefully constructed success. David's assistant, Jennifer, knocked on his office door around noon with a concerned expression that immediately caught his attention. "Mr. Richardson, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she needs to speak with you about a text message from last night. Security wants to know if they should escort her out, but she has a baby with her and seems genuinely distressed, not like our usual walk-ins." David's pulse quickened as he realized Sarah had somehow tracked him down. He instructed Jennifer to bring her up immediately, his mind racing through possible explanations for why she would seek him out in person when they could have continued their anonymous text conversation. As he straightened his tie and tried to calm his unexpectedly nervous energy, David wondered if Sarah was angry about being misled, or if something had gone wrong with the money transfer. Sarah walked into his office carrying Tyler in a worn baby carrier, wearing her cleanest jeans and a sweater that had seen too many wash cycles, looking completely out of place in the sleek executive environment. But her eyes held a determination that David recognized from looking in mirrors during his own climb from poverty to success. And when she spoke, her voice was steadier than he had expected. "I know who you are now," Sarah said, settling Tyler's carrier on the floor and looking directly at David with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and wariness. "I wanted to thank you in person, and I wanted to ask why someone with your resources would bother helping someone like me. People don't usually give away money without expecting something in return, especially not billionaires who could buy my problems and forget about them before lunch." David gestured for her to sit down, noting how she chose the chair closest to Tyler and kept one protective hand on the carrier handle. "I helped because I remember what it feels like to be hungry and afraid," he said simply. "I remember being 7 years old and wondering if anyone in the world cared whether I lived or died. When I read your text last night, I saw myself 30 years ago, and I couldn't ignore that." The conversation that followed changed both their lives in ways neither had anticipated. Sarah learned that David's fortune had been built on the foundation of wanting to solve problems for people who had been forgotten by traditional systems, while David discovered that Sarah had been working 2 jobs while pregnant, had lost everything when Tyler's father disappeared, and possessed a fierce intelligence that poverty had temporarily overshadowed, but never diminished. David found himself offering Sarah something he had never offered anyone: complete honesty about his past. He told her about the foster homes where he was treated like free labor, the nights he went to bed hungry because there wasn't enough food, and the teacher who had believed in him enough to help him apply for scholarships that eventually led to MIT. Sarah listened without judgment, recognizing the pain behind his success, understanding why a late-night plea for baby formula had resonated so deeply with someone who had once been powerless himself. "I have a proposition for you," David said, surprising himself with the words even as they left his mouth. "I need someone I can trust to help me with a project I've been developing. It's a foundation that provides emergency financial assistance to single parents, but I need someone who understands the reality of that situation from the inside. The pay would be significant, and you could bring Tyler to work every day." Sarah stared at him suspiciously, wondering if this was some elaborate setup or if billionaires really made life-changing job offers to strangers they had met 12 hours ago. "What makes you think I'm qualified for anything involving your level of business?" she asked. "I was a waitress at Jimmy's Diner before I got laid off. I don't have a college degree or experience with foundations or any idea how your world works." "You have something more valuable than credentials," David replied. "You have authenticity and perspective. You know what it's like to count every dollar, to choose between paying rent or buying food, to lie awake at night wondering how you're going to survive another week. That knowledge is worth more than any MBA when it comes to understanding who we should help and how we should help them." Tyler chose that moment to wake up and start fussing, and Sarah automatically lifted him from the carrier, bouncing him gently while continuing to maintain eye contact with David. Something about watching her natural maternal instincts, the way she could conduct a serious conversation while simultaneously caring for her child, impressed David in a way that most business presentations failed to achieve. "Give me 24 hours to think about it," Sarah said finally. "This is all happening too fast, and I need to make sure I'm making decisions for the right reasons, not just because I'm desperate or grateful or completely overwhelmed by everything that's happened since last night." David nodded, respecting her caution and recognizing the same careful decision-making process that had served him well throughout his own career. As Sarah gathered Tyler and prepared to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at David with an expression he couldn't quite read. "If I take this job, I need to know that you see me as more than a charity case you're trying to fix. I've been through enough condescension and pity to last a lifetime, and Tyler deserves better than having a mother who's treated like someone's good deed." David spent the rest of that day unable to concentrate on anything except Sarah's parting words and the challenge they represented. No one had ever questioned his motives so directly or demanded to be seen as an equal partner rather than a grateful recipient of his generosity. That evening, he found himself driving through Sarah's neighborhood again, not to check on her but to understand his own motivations and figure out why her opinion of him mattered so much. Sarah, meanwhile, was experiencing her own form of restless energy as she walked Tyler around their small apartment, trying to process everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. The $5,000 sat in her bank account like a safety net she had never expected to have, but the job offer represented something even more valuable: the possibility of building a real future instead of just surviving from crisis to crisis. She called her sister Lisa around 8 that evening, needing to talk through the situation with someone who knew her well enough to provide honest perspective. "So let me get this straight," Lisa said after hearing the entire story. "You accidentally texted a billionaire, he sent you $5,000, tracked you down somehow, offered you a job, and you're worried about his motives? Sarah, sometimes good things actually happen to good people." "But what if he expects something I'm not willing to give?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had been nagging at her all day. "What if this whole thing is some elaborate way for a rich man to feel good about himself while keeping me dependent on his generosity? I've worked too hard to maintain my independence to throw it away now, even for financial security." Lisa was quiet for a moment before responding. "You know what I think? I think you're scared of accepting help because you've been hurt before. But maybe, just maybe, this David guy is exactly what he seems to be. Someone who remembers what it was like to need help and wants to provide it in a way that actually empowers you instead of diminishing you." That night, Sarah made a list of pros and cons, trying to approach the decision with the same logical thinking that had helped her survive months of single parenthood on an impossible budget. The pros column filled up quickly: stable income, meaningful work, ability to help other people in situations like hers, Tyler could stay with her during work hours. The cons column was shorter but weightier, working for someone she barely knew, entering a world where she had no experience, risking her independence. At 2 in the morning, exactly 24 hours after her original desperate text message, Sarah made her decision. She picked up her phone and typed, "I'll take the job, but I have conditions. Before I tell you what those conditions were, answer me in the comments. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes?" Sarah's conditions were specific and non-negotiable, reflecting both her practical needs and her determination to maintain dignity in what could easily become an unbalanced relationship. She wanted a formal employment contract with clearly defined responsibilities, the right to disagree with David's decisions without fear of retaliation, and a guarantee that her performance would be evaluated based on results rather than gratitude. She also insisted on a 6-month trial period where either party could end the arrangement without penalty or explanation. David read her text message with growing respect, recognizing the same strategic thinking that had helped him navigate hostile business negotiations throughout his career. When they met the next morning in his office, he handed her a folder containing everything she had requested plus additional benefits she hadn't thought to ask for: health insurance, paid maternity leave for future children, and a daycare facility that Richardson Technologies would build specifically for employees with young children. "I want you to know that this foundation isn't just about helping people," David explained as Sarah reviewed the contract terms. "It's about changing systems that keep people trapped in poverty cycles. You'll be working with city officials, social workers, and community leaders to identify gaps in existing services and create solutions that actually work for the people who need them most." Sarah looked up from the papers, Tyler sleeping peacefully in her arms after his morning bottle. "What happens if I disagree with your approach or think you're making decisions based on assumptions rather than reality?" she asked. "Rich people often think they understand poverty better than they actually do, and I won't be part of something that condescends to people like me." "Then you tell me I'm wrong and explain why," David replied without hesitation. "I'm hiring you specifically because I need someone who will challenge my assumptions and keep me grounded in actual experience rather than theoretical solutions. Your job is to make sure this foundation helps people effectively, not to make me feel good about my charitable efforts." The honesty in his voice convinced Sarah more than any contract clause could have. She signed the papers that afternoon and started work the following Monday, beginning a partnership that would not only transform countless lives through their foundation work, but also evolve into something neither of them had expected when a desperate mother accidentally texted a billionaire at 2 in the morning. Within 6 months, Sarah had become David's most trusted advisor. The foundation had helped over 200 families avoid eviction, and Tyler had begun calling David's office the fun place because of all the attention he received from staff members who had never worked in a baby-friendly environment before. The transformation in both their lives became evident during their first major foundation presentation to Detroit City Council, 6 months after Sarah started working. She stood confidently in front of the assembled officials, Tyler playing quietly in a corner with toys that David had strategically placed there, presenting statistics and case studies that demonstrated how targeted emergency assistance could prevent homelessness more effectively than traditional social services. "The problem with most charity programs," Sarah explained to the council members, "is that they're designed by people who've never experienced financial desperation. They focus on long-term solutions while people are drowning in immediate crises. Our foundation bridges that gap by providing instant relief while connecting families to sustainable resources." David watched from the back of the room, marveling at how Sarah had evolved from a desperate single mother into a passionate advocate who commanded respect from seasoned politicians and social workers. She spoke with authority that came from lived experience, backing up every recommendation with both hard data and personal understanding of what families actually needed versus what organizations thought they needed. After the presentation, Council member Patricia Williams approached Sarah with an expression of genuine interest. "I've been working on poverty issues for 15 years, and this is the first time I've heard someone explain the problem from the perspective of someone who's actually lived it. Would you be interested in joining our housing crisis task force as a community representative?" Sarah accepted immediately, knowing that having a voice in policy decisions would amplify her ability to help families beyond what even David's considerable resources could accomplish through the foundation alone. That evening, as she tucked Tyler into his crib in their new apartment, subsidized through the foundation but chosen and decorated entirely according to her own preferences, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed. The scared woman who had texted a stranger begging for $30 had become someone whose opinions were sought by city officials and whose work was featured in newspaper articles about innovative approaches to urban poverty. But more importantly, she had maintained her independence and self-respect throughout the transformation, never feeling like a project or charity case, but always like a valued professional whose insights mattered. David had experienced his own transformation, learning to see his wealth as a tool for systemic change rather than just philanthropic gestures. Working closely with Sarah had taught him that effective charity required humility, listening, and willingness to be wrong about assumptions he had never questioned before. 1 year after their first meeting, Sarah and David were featured together on the cover of Detroit magazine as Partners in Change: How One Wrong Number Text created the city's most effective anti-poverty initiative. The article detailed how their foundation had prevented over 800 evictions, provided emergency assistance to more than 1,500 families, and influenced policy changes that improved social services citywide. But the article only scratched the surface of how their professional partnership had evolved into something more complex and meaningful. David had become a regular presence in Tyler's life, teaching him to stack blocks and reading bedtime stories during late work sessions, while Sarah had become David's closest confidant and the person whose opinion he valued most when making both business and personal decisions. People ask me all the time if this is a romantic story, Sarah told the magazine interviewer. But I think it's something more important than that. It's about two people who found each other at exactly the right moment to build something bigger than either of us could have created alone. David gave me opportunity, but I gave him purpose. Tyler gave us both perspective on what really matters. Their relationship had indeed grown beyond professional collaboration, but it had developed naturally over months of shared work, late-night conversations about systemic inequality, and gradual recognition that they balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses perfectly. David's strategic thinking combined with Sarah's grassroots understanding created solutions that neither could have developed independently. The foundation's success had attracted national attention, with similar programs being replicated in Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. Sarah found herself traveling to conferences and speaking to audiences of social workers, policymakers, and philanthropists about the importance of including people with lived experience in poverty-fighting initiatives, rather than just targeting them as recipients of help. Tyler, now a confident toddler, had adapted to being the unofficial mascot of the foundation office, charming donors and volunteers while reminding everyone why their work mattered. His presence in professional settings had initially surprised some traditional donors, but Sarah's insistence that work-life integration was essential for single parents had gradually changed attitudes throughout David's broader business network. During quiet moments between meetings and presentations, Sarah sometimes marveled at the chain of events that had brought them together. A moment of desperation had led to the wrong number, which had led to unexpected generosity, which had led to professional opportunity, which had led to systemic change that was now affecting thousands of families across multiple cities. The Foundation's second anniversary celebration was held in the same Detroit Community Center, where Sarah had once brought Tyler for free meals during their most desperate period. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The woman who had once relied on charity services was now designing and implementing programs that reached families across the entire metropolitan area, while the billionaire who could have easily written checks from a distance had become personally invested in understanding ground-level poverty dynamics. When I sent that first text message 2 years ago, Sarah addressed the crowd of foundation staff, community partners, and families they had helped. I was asking for $30 to feed my son. What I received was so much more than money. I received partnership, opportunity, and the chance to turn my worst moment into a foundation for helping others avoid that same desperation. David stood beside her, holding Tyler, who was now old enough to help by holding the microphone and occasionally adding his own commentary to the speeches, reflecting on how this accidental connection had transformed his understanding of effective philanthropy. Traditional charity had always felt unsatisfying to him because it maintained distance between giver and receiver. But working directly with Sarah had taught him that the most powerful change happened through genuine partnership. The celebration included testimonials from families who had received foundation assistance: Maria Santos, who avoided eviction and used the breathing room to find stable employment; James Wright, who received emergency car repairs that allowed him to keep his job and maintain custody of his daughter; Jennifer Lopez, who got help with medical bills and was now volunteering as a foundation community advocate herself. Each story reinforced what Sarah had insisted from the beginning. People didn't need to be rescued. They needed temporary support during crisis moments so they could rescue themselves. The foundation's model of providing immediate assistance while connecting families to longer-term resources had proven more effective than traditional approaches that required people to navigate complex bureaucracies while managing immediate emergencies. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Sarah found herself standing in the same corner where she had once fed Tyler-donated food, while wondering how they would survive another week. The contrast between that memory and her current reality as a respected community leader and policy advocate would have been unimaginable during those dark months of struggling alone. Tyler, now exhausted from being the center of attention all evening, fell asleep in David's arms as they cleaned up after the event. Watching them together, Sarah felt a contentment that had nothing to do with financial security and everything to do with having built something meaningful with people she cared about deeply. 3 years into their partnership, Sarah received an offer that would test everything they had built together. The Department of Health and Human Services in Washington contacted her about leading a national initiative to redesign emergency assistance programs based on the Detroit model they had created. The position would mean relocating to the nation's capital, taking Tyler away from the only stable community he had ever known, and leaving behind the work that had become her passion. David's initial reaction was purely selfish. He didn't want to lose the person who had become not just his closest professional collaborator, but also his best friend, and the closest thing to family he had experienced since childhood. But he also recognized that Sarah's expertise was needed on a national scale, and that limiting her opportunities to keep her close would be both wrong and ultimately counterproductive for their shared goals. "You have to take it," he told her during a late evening conversation in his office while Tyler played with building blocks on the floor between them. "This is your chance to influence policy for millions of families instead of thousands. Everything we've learned here can be scaled up and implemented across the entire country." Sarah had been wrestling with the same conclusion, but hearing David support her decision made it both easier and harder to accept. Easier because she valued his opinion above almost anyone else's, and harder because leaving would mean dismantling the daily partnership that had become central to both their lives over the past 3 years. "What if I take the job for 2 years, learn everything I can about national policy implementation, and then come back to expand what we've built here?" she proposed. "Detroit can be our pilot program, but eventually we could create a national network of locally run foundations that share resources and strategies." The solution satisfied both their immediate needs and long-term vision. Sarah would gain experience with federal policy, while maintaining connection to their original work. David would expand Richardson Technologies' involvement in social impact initiatives, and Tyler would benefit from exposure to different communities, while maintaining stability through continued relationships with the people who had become his extended family. They spent the next 6 months preparing for Sarah's transition, training her replacement, documenting everything they had learned about effective poverty intervention, and creating systems that would allow them to continue collaborating despite geographical separation. The Foundation's 3rd anniversary celebration became both a graduation ceremony for Sarah's next career phase and a commitment ceremony to maintaining their partnership regardless of distance. Sarah's work in Washington exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. Within 18 months, she had helped rewrite federal emergency assistance guidelines to include immediate response protocols that prevented families from falling into homelessness while waiting for traditional social services to process their applications. The changes she advocated for, based on lessons learned through the Detroit Foundation, were implemented in over 40 states and helped more than 100,000 families avoid eviction. David had expanded Richardson Technologies' social impact division, creating employment opportunities for people transitioning out of poverty, while developing technology solutions that streamlined access to social services. Their model of combining immediate financial assistance with job training and technology education had become a template for corporate social responsibility that other companies were adopting across multiple industries. Tyler, now 5 years old and thriving in Washington's diverse educational environment, had maintained close contact with David through video calls, weekend visits, and summer vacations spent working in the Detroit Foundation office. His comfort level with adults, confidence in professional settings, and natural empathy for people facing difficulties reflected the unique environment in which he had grown up, surrounded by people working to solve complex social problems. The success of their separately managed but coordinated initiatives had attracted attention from international development organizations, and Sarah found herself consulting on poverty alleviation strategies for programs in Latin America and Southeast Asia. Her approach of centering program design around people with lived experience of poverty, rather than academic theories about poverty, was being adapted for cultural contexts far beyond anything she had imagined when she first started working with David. During one of Tyler's summer visits to Detroit, he asked David why he and his mom lived in different places when they were best friends who work on the same projects. The question prompted a conversation between Sarah and David about whether their current arrangement was truly optimal for any of them, or whether they had been so focused on career advancement that they had overlooked simpler solutions. "What if we brought the Washington work back to Detroit?" Sarah suggested during one of their regular video conferences. "I've learned what I needed to learn about federal policy, and you've proven that corporate social responsibility can be profitable. Maybe it's time to create something completely new that combines everything we've developed separately." The idea of reuniting their efforts, both professional and personal, felt like coming home after a successful but sometimes lonely adventure. They began planning a return that would establish Detroit as a national center for innovative poverty intervention, bringing together Sarah's policy expertise, David's business resources, and Tyler's reminder that all their work ultimately served children who deserved stability and opportunity. Sarah's return to Detroit was marked by the launch of the Richardson-Martinez Institute for Economic Justice, a collaboration that combined foundation work, policy research, corporate partnership development, and community organizing under one comprehensive initiative. The Institute's headquarters occupied an entire floor of Richardson Technologies' downtown building, with additional community offices in neighborhoods throughout the metropolitan area. The Institute's approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of trying to fix poverty from the outside, they created systems that amplified the problem-solving capabilities of people experiencing poverty while providing them with resources to implement their own solutions. Sarah's experiences in Washington had convinced her that sustainable change required shifting power dynamics, not just redistributing resources. Tyler, now 6 and starting first grade, had his own corner office in the Institute where he did homework, played with visiting children, and occasionally offered his perspective on whether proposed programs would actually help kids like him. His presence served as a constant reminder that policy decisions affected real families, not just statistical demographics. David had discovered that his most satisfying business achievements came from ventures that created employment opportunities for people transitioning out of poverty, while generating legitimate profits through innovative approaches to persistent social problems. The Institute's job training programs had become recruitment pipelines for Richardson Technologies and other partner companies, proving that social responsibility and business success were not mutually exclusive. 3 years after Sarah's return, the Institute had facilitated the creation of similar programs in 12 cities, prevented over 10,000 evictions, helped more than 3,000 people find stable employment, and influenced policy changes that improved social services in 26 states. But more importantly to Sarah, Tyler was growing up in an environment where helping others was normal, where complex problems had creative solutions, and where his mother was respected for her intelligence and expertise. The Institute's success had attracted national media attention, political support, and funding from major philanthropic organizations, but Sarah and David remained focused on the individual stories behind their statistics. Every family helped, every eviction prevented, every job created represented someone's life stabilized and future secured, which was what mattered most to both of them. During quiet moments in their shared office space, Sarah sometimes reflected on the journey from that desperate text message to their current reality. She had never expected that asking for $30 would lead to influencing national policy, but she had also never expected that accepting help would lead to creating better systems for helping others. On the 5th anniversary of Sarah's original text message, she and David were invited to testify before Congress about innovative approaches to poverty alleviation, representing not just their own work, but a national movement toward community-centered social policy that had grown far beyond what either of them had originally envisioned. Tyler, now 8 years old and comfortable in any professional setting, accompanied them to Washington as their youth policy consultant. The congressional testimony focused on lessons learned from scaling local initiatives to national programs. But Sarah's most powerful moment came when she addressed the fundamental misconception that poverty was caused by personal failures rather than systemic barriers. 5 years ago, I was a single mother working 2 jobs who couldn't afford baby formula, she told the assembled representatives. I wasn't lazy, uneducated, or irresponsible. I was trapped in a system that makes it almost impossible to climb out of poverty once you fall into it. David's testimony complemented Sarah's by demonstrating how businesses could participate in poverty alleviation while maintaining profitability and competitive advantage. His presentation included case studies of companies that had adopted their model, showing improved employee retention, enhanced community relations, and measurable social impact alongside traditional business metrics. The hearing generated national media coverage that positioned Sarah and David as leading voices in contemporary discussions about wealth inequality, social policy, and corporate responsibility. But they returned to Detroit focused on expanding their local work rather than capitalizing on their national prominence, believing that lasting change happened through sustained community engagement rather than celebrity status. Tyler's perspective on their work had evolved as he grew older and began understanding the broader implications of what his family did for living. During a school presentation about careers, he explained that his mom and David help people who don't have enough money for important things, and then they help those people help other people, so everyone gets better at the same time. The Institute's 10th anniversary celebration, held in Detroit's Hart Plaza with over 5,000 attendees, included testimonials from families across multiple generations who had been helped by their programs. Former recipients had become volunteers, staff members, policy advocates, and community leaders, creating a network of people who understood both poverty and empowerment from personal experience. As Sarah watched Tyler play with children whose families had been helped by the Institute, she realized that the most important outcome of their work wasn't the statistics or policy changes, but the demonstration that individual acts of kindness could grow into systemic transformation when approached with intelligence, persistence, and genuine partnership between people from different backgrounds. Today, 12 years after that desperate text message, Sarah serves as director of the National Institute for Economic Justice, overseeing similar programs in over 60 cities while maintaining her home base in Detroit. Tyler, now 14 years old, volunteers at the original foundation office and has announced his intention to study social policy and business, planning to continue the work that has shaped his entire childhood and worldview. David has restructured Richardson Technologies as a certified B Corporation that balances profit with social impact, creating thousands of jobs for people transitioning out of poverty while maintaining market competitiveness in the technology sector. His approach has influenced other business leaders to reconsider their own company's potential for addressing social problems through employment and community investment, rather than just charitable donations. The ripple effects of their partnership extend far beyond their direct work. Former program recipients have started their own community organizations. Policymakers trained through the Institute have influenced legislation in multiple states, and business leaders inspired by their model have created similar initiatives in industries ranging from healthcare to construction to education. Sarah's story has become a case study taught in business schools, social work programs, and public policy courses, but she remains most proud of the individual relationships and personal transformations that statistics can't capture. Every family helped, every person employed, every system improved represents someone whose life trajectory was changed by the principle that effective help requires partnership rather than charity. Tyler's childhood, spent in conference rooms and community centers where adults worked on complex social problems, has given him a unique perspective on leadership, empathy, and the connection between individual actions and systemic change. His generation is growing up with different assumptions about corporate responsibility, wealth distribution, and the possibility of creating economic systems that work for everyone rather than just the wealthy. The Foundation's model has been replicated internationally, with adaptations in over 20 countries that reflect local contexts while maintaining core principles of community participation, immediate assistance, and systemic change. Sarah regularly travels to consult on these programs, bringing lessons learned from Detroit to communities facing similar challenges in different cultural and economic contexts. What started as one desperate mother's plea for $30 became a movement that has helped hundreds of thousands of families while changing how society thinks about poverty, charity, and the responsibility that comes with wealth and privilege. Sarah's wrong number text message to David proved that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with accidents that connect people who were meant to find each other. Their story demonstrates that effective change requires more than good intentions or generous donations. It requires genuine partnership between people from different backgrounds, willingness to learn from those who have experienced problems firsthand, and commitment to creating systems that empower rather than simply assist. Sarah and David's collaboration succeeded because neither tried to rescue the other, but instead they built something together that neither could have achieved alone. Tyler's generation is growing up with different expectations about corporate responsibility, wealth distribution, and the possibility of creating economic systems that serve everyone, rather than concentrating benefits among the already privileged. His childhood spent watching adults solve complex social problems through innovation and partnership has shaped his understanding that individual success is meaningless without community well-being. The Institute continues expanding its reach, training new leaders who combine lived experience of poverty with policy expertise, business acumen, and community organizing skills. Each program graduate becomes a seed for similar initiatives in their own communities, creating a network of change agents who understand that sustainable solutions must come from within affected communities, rather than being imposed from outside. Sarah's journey from desperate single mother to national policy leader illustrates that people don't need to be saved from poverty. They need access to opportunities that allow them to save themselves while helping others do the same. Her partnership with David proves that wealth can be a tool for justice when wielded by people who understand both privilege and struggle. Today, when Sarah tucks Tyler into bed in their comfortable Detroit home, she sometimes tells him the story of the night she accidentally texted a stranger and changed both their lives forever. But the real miracle wasn't that a billionaire helped a struggling mother. It was that two people chose to transform a moment of desperation into a lifetime of purpose that continues touching lives they will never meet. Their story reminds us that in our interconnected world, we are all just one wrong number, one moment of courage, one act of unexpected kindness away from connections that could transform not just our own lives, but the lives of countless others. Sometimes the help we need comes from the most unlikely places, and sometimes the help we offer creates changes we never imagined possible. The foundation that began with $30 for baby formula now operates with an annual budget of over $50 million. But its most valuable asset remains the principle that guided Sarah and David from the beginning. Real change happens when people see each other as partners in creating solutions rather than problems to be solved or charity to be given. What do you think about Sarah and David's incredible journey? Have you ever experienced a moment when asking for help led to something bigger than you expected? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story inspired you to think differently about how we can help each other, make sure to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they find the courage to connect with each other in authentic ways.